I'm big.
And I'm definitely now surly.
Great. We've started things off right.
Yeah, we did. And it is a tiring Sunday morning. So today we're going to be talking about research methods, eh?
Yeah. And what's your go-to for learning about a topic?
Science.
Jesus.
That's
He's
literally
definitely surly, folks. Yes,
no, I mean
science. But
literally. I will look for primary and secondary literature on it.
how do you find primary and secondary literature?
Well, I mean, like there's good sites that stick around, and I mean, I've been doing this for years, right? So I came to the media game already knowing vast areas that they were misrepresenting, so it made it easier to track down good and bad sources of information.
So for somebody that's starting from zero,
Yeah.
I guess my suggestion, and I know your knee-jerk reaction is going to be negative, but bear with me. Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is good, I find, unless it is an area that is hotly debated or where emotions are strong or there's a lot of political fucking bullshit going on. Like looking up
My
something,
suggestion would be not even to read Wikipedia, though.
you just said
What you do,
Wikipedia.
exactly, but you didn't let me finish.
Okay.
In Wikipedia, every statement in there is required by the way Wikipedia is set up to have a source. So if you scroll to the bottom of a Wikipedia entry, there is a list of bibliography for all the points made in that Wikipedia article. Some of them are going to be primary sources and journalistic secondary sources. They're not all going to be, but some of them are going to meet the criteria that Josh said that he looks for. And so what you can do is, rather than read what some person has read, or rather than read what some person has written based on what they've read, you can use Wikipedia to go down directly to the source that they're citing.
And I mean, a problem with this is like sometimes people are not going to be able to follow the sources that they're getting into. I mean, sometimes they won't have the math. Sometimes they won't be able to understand the statistics or how samples are made, things like that. So while I say it rather pithily that I turn to the science and the studies and the academics on it, most people struggle with these sources. So, I mean, asking someone to do what I do, and I'm literally obsessed with basically how things work, and I'm constantly trying to learn stuff, who don't have time for that. We need to find something easier, I think, than the way me and you get about things. Because I mean, most people don't have the time to think into this.
Wikipedia is what I would tell my university students.
Start there.
So I guess we're aiming, I am aiming this in part towards someone with at least a high school education.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got to have
first year university
literacy.
students, the trick I would tell them is two things when they're writing a paper. Number one, install Grammarly. I don't know if Grammarly is still free, but Grammarly improves your writing. It corrects your grammar.
Cool.
And does so in a way that is more intuitive than the automatic systems that are built into like a word processor.
Okay.
The second thing is, if you don't know anything about a topic and your professor hasn't given you primary source material from which to write, you're supposed to go out and find a topic that interests you. Then Wikipedia is a good place to start. Again, not because you're reading the Wikipedia entry, though you can for general information, but you should take that general information with a large grain of salt. It's that at the bottom of the page in Wikipedia are the primary sources that you would actually potentially want to use for your own paper's bibliography. And so when you're doing research, Wikipedia can be a good starting point.
Mhm.
Because if you're not on a university system or attached, like working out of a university library for science research, you can often run into, and I do with my job, reading about neuroscience and trauma and whatnot, that all you can get are abstracts of the paper. You can't get the paper itself for free. You have to pay for the paper.
See, I can just reach out to my dad and get whatever I want. He is next
Attached to a university. Yeah.
He's like retired, but he still teaches there. So
Yeah.
I mean, I still have access to the ivory tower despite having fucking turned my back on it.
And that,
Growing
I mean,
up,
that if you're just getting started in trying to figure out what is bullshit and what is truth, and to make up your own mind about what that will be.
be prepared for rabbit holes for certain.
Rabbit holes, but also like abstracts aren't the worst place for you to start. It is, your ultimate goal is to be able to read the paper and know whether or not the people who wrote the paper made some significant mistake.
Most people
But
will never
if
get
it's
to that
in a
level.
journal,
Yeah, peer review is what you're looking for.
if it's in a peer-reviewed journal, that's generally a good indicator that either someone has duplicated the experiment, thereby proving the methodology,
Yeah.
or someone has at least reviewed the data to determine whether or not someone's making a significant error in interpreting it.
And I mean, even in science, among scientists, it is understood that there is an incredible amount of bad work out there. And because of the cost of replication, there cannot be replication. And I mean, recently, Fauci has taken the good name of science and wiped his ass with it, as far as I can tell.
Who's
He worked,
Fauci?
your Dr. Fauci down in the US.
Fauci.
Fauci. I've only seen it written. I don't watch shit about him. Well, I do. Fauci. Apparently, this dipshit has undermined peer review and major scientific literature from February 2020 to bury the lab leak hypothesis, even though at the time of the release there was considerable consensus that the lab leak was at least at the worst 50-50, at the best 50-50, and at the worst 70-30. So again, you also have to come to the realization that even within science, there is bad science, there is gamed science, there's abuse of the peer review system, and there's other things going on that
Can you
make
explain to us what you mean by gamed science?
Well, I mean, I know for a fact that here at Memorial University, there has been someone has changed the parameters that they were looking for post results so that their research went through.
Adjusting your hypothesis so that
Post facto, so
Yeah.
that you get the right hypothesis. And that sort of, from what I understand, discussing things with other people, we have a real problem with capitalism influencing science, like big pharma. And I mean, this is like that we're past the point of tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. Because I mean, big pharma is playing with the results. Big pharma basically owns the FDA. So I mean, when it comes to it, even my own methods of trying to understand the truth are susceptible to the same capitalist forces that have bent mainstream media into such a propaganda machine, have also twisted science to the point where some stuff is becoming, it's hard to trust any of it. And I mean, this is a real problem with the research methodology, is that for especially when you're trying to understand what's going on in the press, is that all of this stuff is going on, and it's actually creating an incredible amount of junk science, and we're getting junk press. And the totality of it, it does create like this massive amount of confusion and misinformation. So even when you're going through the peer review process, you still have to take things with a grain of salt. And I mean, this just goes back to the very premises of science: is something is only true until it's not. And then you move the fuck on because it's no longer true. So, I mean, you really
Pluto
can't.
was a planet until they recharacterized how
Well,
planets are, and Pluto no longer makes the cut.
well, I mean, we're in a crisis of physics right now, from my understanding, because the age of the universe, speed of expansion, and other things are not lining up. And then you have the problems with dark matter, and then you have the problems with gravity. So, I mean, when you,
Michio Kaku put out a big statement the other day that was basically like string theory is either going to solve everything or disprove everything.
I didn't hear about that. I just follow some stuff, and I know that, I mean, even in biology, in the human body, we recently discovered a new organ in the body. So, I mean, us
What's
not,
that?
it was somewhere in the throat. It was within the past 6 months or so. It was a previously unknown organ. And this stuff, and the like a month or two ago, they figured out what the appendix is for. So, I mean,
What
and
is the appendix for?
I didn't read the article. I was just like, oh,
Oh,
so it happened. It was I can dig out both of the articles for you. I mean, I wasn't that interested in either of them. They were just on my science feed.
that's
Um,
another good solution, is to find a feed or a
I made, yeah,
news aggregator that is reliable.
none of them are.
Well, mostly reliable. Josh is an extremist,
No,
and
I'm a
well,
radical.
you, it's all perspective, buddy. It's all
Uh,
perspective.
I am more I will.
I'm a radical. You are an extremist.
You're a
Like,
centrist.
I am, to you, I'm a centrist.
Politically, you're a centrist. I mean, you agree with you.
From the global standard, I'm center right or center left.
Yeah. Whereas I'm left, a left libertarian, hard libertarian.
But there are libertarians who would say there are no such thing as left libertarians.
Math disagrees with them. Anyway,
How so?
well, the when you take that grid for the,
Well, the political compass is just another conceit. One
hmm,
of the things I run into when talking to people about politics is that most people have not been educated on any standard beyond what the mainstream media uses, which conflates economics and uh, politics into one spectrum.
yeah,
And they think of it as a left-right dichotomy. And many of the right wingers place fascists on the left.
they try to blame that on a fascist. I mean, there are totalitarian. I thought totalitarianism. I don't know.
That's why the political compass is a more perfect instrument, but it's not perfect.
I mean, left or right. I mean, the left-right dichotomy is. I mean, there's a saying is, if you go far enough left, you get your guns back, right? So, I mean, militantism in the left is just as bad as militantism in the right, as far as I'm concerned. The opposite of fascism is no better, but that's my view. Anyway, back to the whole idea of research is, and this whole idea of aggregator is, I find that you take a little bit from everybody. Like, I follow sources with right biases, I follow sources with left biases, I follow sources with authoritarian biases, I follow them with libertarian biases, I follow science feeds. I cut and I follow multiple of them because if you understand that 5 corporations basically own the world, this is actually not a joke. There's actually, I think it was Oxfam did a really interesting chart that links back all corporations in the world to 5 mega corporations, one of them being Coca-Cola. Jesus, that was a long sentence without a breath. Anyway, so yeah, if you understand that 5 companies own the world and basically 3 of those companies own most worldwide press, you're really looking around the fringes plus the mainstream to put together the totality of what's going on. Everyone's going to have their own spin, everyone's going to have their own ideas, but between like, it's almost like you're trying to average the news if you're looking at it like math.
Or at least the perspectives that the various news sources have. And we just did an episode on that. So watch that one if you haven't.
There is no such thing as a lack of bias. Even like, there just isn't.
Objectivity can be attempted. It can never be truly accomplished.
Yeah. And I mean, media, like, I mean, the state-sponsored media exists here in Canada, and the CBC has its lines that it toes, from what I can tell. And like our private media up here in Canada are very much like neoliberal. And this is what I've always said: the bias of mainstream media is neoliberal. And I think that's a fairly center right with the appearances of left inclinations. You know?
Well, yeah, I think we could make the argument that the media in the form that it currently exists is rentier.
Is what?
Rentier.
Rentier has a very specific economic term. What do you mean there? And that's how I think you're using it. And for the people watching, rentier actually means a person who lives off of rent in a way. There's 2 ways of making income. There is labor and there is rent. And rent since the late 1700s with what's his name, Adam Smith, has been considered an extremely negative force on economics. But the thing is if you actually look at our market economics that are in play, the most of global money is in the rentier market that has developed around Wall Street and the other financial centers around the world. Stocks and the fact that stockholder rights are considered so important in corporations means that all corporations are working for a rentier basis. And that is actually how we've seen such a massive transfer of wealth to the 1% over the last 50, 60 years. Speeding up dramatically.
The media specifically is rentier because the mainstream media is often not actually generating news. They don't have reporters going out to report news. They often are responding to articles in newspapers or tweets by actual working journalists. Mm-hmm. They're just eating there. It's no different than a website that copies some other website's
listicle and then puts it up. The talking heads, right?
Yes. Well, that is mainstream media. It is pretty much 24/7 talking heads.
Yeah.
You have 6 hours of talking heads in the morning, and you have 6 hours of talking heads.
The 24-hour news cycle basically weaponized. Yes. I would say in a way it incentivized a real sort of, what did Jon Stewart called it? Arsonist approach?
Yes. I don't know if he did, but that's an accurate
I watched the
statement.
video.
It's someone that their attitude is they're fomenting fear and madness.
Did you hear about this?
No.
Okay. So I guess Newsweek said that I'm pretty sure it was Jon Stewart. He's a guy with a gray beard who has his own like podcast. Yes. Anyway, said that he called what's her face?
Got a show on Apple TV.
The Harry Potter missus an anti-Semite because the goblins. and he was
Oh,
making
yes,
jokes
I did
about
see
this. Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah.
Yes,
But
that
he
was on
said
a
your
podcast.
business model is arson. I think is almost verbatim. Is
Is
almost a
how
direct
he,
quote.
yeah, it was something like that
Yeah.
in response to Newsweek fomenting.
So I mean, when we look at what we're trying to learn, and I mean, this is I brought up this for a really good reason, is that is their business model. So I mean, you can't trust that business model, period. And that's why this research is so important that people develop, right?
The 24-hour news channels basically want to hit your dopamine button over and over again in
Yeah.
order to keep you watching,
Yeah.
because they make money on advertising.
I mean, it's in a
And
lot of ways.
advertising is translated, eyeballs translate to dollars.
Mm. It's the attention economy. I mean, social media competes for your attention, news competes for your attention. I mean, there's so much going on in this world that you cannot follow everything. No human brain is capable of it. I mean, at best, you're going to become hyper specialized in some field like a surgeon and basically a fucking imbecile in half a dozen other fields. Like, that's the payoff. For really bright people often have trouble dealing with people because I mean that's the payoff. The hyper specialization, the use of jargon, the isolation from like normal people. Like you see this thing where most of us are just generalists. We can do a small bit of everything. And I mean, this is where community, I think, actually becomes really important because as I develop these news sources, like I find Russell Brand actually really good for searching out quite interesting pieces of news and then talking about it. Like he's talking about Nancy Pelosi's stock options. He does everything on the left and right, which I actually think is something that news has forgotten how to do. Is even though he is not right, he is willing to debate their views. Um, Joe Rogan is a surprisingly decent source. Glenn Greenwald is a really good source. Not Joe Rogan is a hit or miss source, but he's trying. And he has been able to isolate and call out the media a number of times quite effectively over their misinformation. Glenn Greenwald is a really good source on his own. Caitlin Johnson, I think is her name. Like
Caitlin Johnston on
Caitlin Johnson, yeah. I mean,
Common Grounds,
yeah.
yes.
Breaking Views is a really good news show, I find it, that has actually been doing a really good job about helping pull back the covers. And I mean, what you're looking for are people who are trying to educate you, not people who are trying to manipulate your emotions for profit.
Or push an ideal. That's one of the arguments I have with Caitlin Jones, is that she is a little too ideological. Like, I do like Greenwald a lot because Greenwald seems to strive for objectivity in the framework of what he chooses to report on.
That's honestly the best you can hope for. No one, like
Yeah,
it again gets back to
because
it. It's like
just the
not all
choice of what you
reporters are gonna
report
do it.
is a bias.
Yep. Even the way it's framed is a bias. And that's the hardest thing is parsing between how things are framed for the actual incidences that might have occurred. What's actually going on past the narrative is something I find really what you're trying to find is that. What are they not saying? What are they saying but is being lost in their emotive language, their their warmongering? Why are they attacking this person over here? Like, I mean, it's gone. I mean, now false flags are now admitted to. False flags have now gone from conspiracy theories to something governments do to start wars by mainstream media. That happened the other day. An unnamed source, it says that Russia is planning a false flag. I mean, that level of journalism from honestly what I would consider military assets is what American journalists have become is really hard to trust anymore. You know what I mean? Like if a media
Sure,
is
we are
bringing shit,
nearly as bad as the nations that have state-controlled media.
you that's because you
If
the
you
military.
you're going to argue that we're worse than nations that have state-controlled media
No,
because it's the illusion that it's not state
we
controlled.
got the same problem up here with our media. It's media controlled by corporate interests in the military industrial complex. I mean, when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, media in Canada screamed in futile chest beating and brow beating and like pulling of hair and rage, like it was something to watch. But like right now, one of the greatest humanitarian crises I think in the world is unfolding in Afghanistan. People are starving to death, all sorts of stuff. Media doesn't care because fucking Lockheed doesn't care. My view
Yeah,
of it.
no, that's true.
That's like
In
the neoliberal bias.
the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, as they drug on, it
Mm.
became, if not, I don't remember if it was expressly illegal or it was a de facto threat to media entities that if they reported on bodies coming back and the number of dead Americans as a result of the war and the number of casualties, that there would be serious repercussions.
Well, they shot the Reuters journalist in an attack helicopter. Was exposed by WikiLeaks, right? So, I mean, the fact that journalists toe the line out of fear of their lives in America and Canada is apparently might be a little too close to hitting to home, I think. I
Well,
think
it's
we have
not
to
just that,
understand, like,
it's
you're
also that if you if entity A pisses off the power structure, then everyone at entity A loses the ability to gain access to the White House for
yeah,
briefings or to senators for comment and whatnot. Like
yeah.
they'll freeze people out,
We call it the
which is
cocktail
odd
circuit.
because, like, it's interesting. Fox News recently in a legal case made the argument that Fox News is actually entertainment, not news.
That's been steadily increasing as lawsuits build over false reporting. I think that there was one missus who was like, nobody should believe my show. It was like this white missus with short hair on Fox.
Nancy Grace.
I don't know. I couldn't be bothered with their names. They're just fucking, as far as I can tell, like one of the highest levels of psychopaths per profession is in the fucking mainstream media. And it's like, doesn't surprise me. I mean,
And
don't look,
again, it's the question of, are they natural psychopaths and sociopaths, or are they trained sociopaths that society
people,
puts them in a position where, in order to maintain their position, they have to act in a manner which is counter to the sustaining of society itself?
what we have to understand is that people, like from a psychological perspective, individuality is kind of a joke. People conform themselves to groups, but they also seek out groups that suit them personally. So there is a chicken or egg issue going on. I mean, law school, when I started law school, um, I remember I'm a cynical motherfucker. Even I had one of my law teachers say this is the most cynical person I've ever met to his wife, and she's like, more cynical than you? And he's like, yep, he got me beat. So I mean, I walked into law cynical. I walked into law school basically like I'm gonna do whatever I can to help shit, but I'm not a human. I'm not like these young kids are like human rights, rah rah rah, big smiles on their faces. It's like you have not seen starving children in your life, have you? But I watched them from year one, these hopeful little kids crushed into cynical, uncaring corporate lawyers. And I mean, the law school was very open about the psychological manipulation that was going on. They talked to about it from day one. And I mean, then you have something like media. You're already going to have someone who's probably suffering from at least one of the dark triad of personality traits, which
Which
is
are,
narcissism. Oh, fuck the dark triad. Narcissism, psychopathy, and I can't remember. If you look up the dark triad, you'll be able to find it. But you're probably looking at people who are at least,
Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
yeah.
And
So I mean,
Machiavellianism is a reference to Machiavelli, or specifically the Prince, and the interpretation that Machiavelli was writing a manual rather than a mockery. And Machiavellianism is basically you will manipulate every circumstance to be of benefit to yourself.
better to be feared than loved. So, I mean, you're going to be looking at probably narcissism to a degree. I mean, to want to be on television, it takes a certain sort of personality to want to be in the limelight. And I mean, this is kind of the idea is I don't say we stop media. I say we start screening though for the dark triad in certain professions and disallowing certain people from certain professions. It might actually have to
Theoretically, they
happen.
do that for police.
No, they
They
don't.
don't really, but they're
No.
supposedly they do.
And again, it's the police
Um,
is a culture problem. Like here up in Canada, the RCMP have a history of sexual abuse to member and violence towards their own members that is actually fairly well documented and has been the subject of class actions. I mean, the RCMP were literally created to destroy the Aboriginal population and take over Canada for the powers that be. In
just
the
like in the US,
1960s,
the
yeah.
police grew out of slave catching.
Yep. I mean, this is the thing. Neither of our countries is a good country. And I mean, you've always accused me of being down on America, but I'm only down on America with you. When I talk to Canadians, I'm down on Canada. I mean, it's whoever I'm talking to. It's like, this is what's going on in your fucking country. You know, a lot of
Well, you're
people,
not just talking to me, you're also talking
which
to
is why I'm
Jeff.
now bringing up all of these topics. I'm trying to like, it's very hard to talk about Canada in some ways because in some ways the information is not looked at or is missing. Like we have our own problem with police violence up here. We have our own problems with institutional racism. I'm working on trying to expose a case right now where a man from a Canadian of East Indian descent was basically jumped on and destroyed through the legal system for just not towing the line, from what I can tell of the documents. And this entire problem involves cops, judges, lawyers, and other government officials all working independently to basically punish this guy. And uh, they were so hell-bent on punishing him, they broke the law like multiple times from what I can tell. And getting the press here to touch this, it won't fucking happen. I've been working for 6 years now to try to get it into the press. They won't touch it. So, I mean, this is again, when it's back to our idea is that these things, how it's very hard to know who you can trust because you don't know what they're hiding from you. You only know what they're reporting to you. And all you can do is compare that to everything else that's being reported around the same topic. And in there, that's where I find how much I can trust a news source on specific things and understand what they're useful for. Like I'm much more likely to trust the people from Breaking Views or Russell Brand, for example, or like Glenn Greenwald than I am ever to trust anything out of CNN, MSDN, CBC, or things up here because there's just they don't report on a lot of things. A lot of things that are very important to Canadians and to Americans and to other people will never make our news. And that's a big problem. So, I mean, this is again where social media comes from. Look for real people. Don't follow outlets, is my view. Like, get your ass on Twitter, find the people who are real, follow them, I get my news between Facebook and Twitter are the two places I look for news, and I find people who are doing real work with backgrounds that are actually putting out solid information on a consistent basis.
And
Right?
don't trust us.
Basically,
Like,
yeah.
that extends the don't trust people. I'm not excluding myself from that. We
Yeah.
are basically playing talking head,
Yep.
just on a social media platform.
Yep.
You, Jeff, are responsible for making your own opinion. You don't have to share mine. You don't have to share Josh's.
The Jeffs.
No,
You, the
not
Jeffs.
no. Jeff individually is Jeff. Everybody is not the Jeffs. No plural, no S. It's just the Jeff. They're like an uncountable noun.
Okay. So anyway, the Jeff, I don't know. I assume Jeff can make up his own mind.
I know he can, but I want all of you who are watching this probably 10 years after I die to realize that we were trying to motivate. And again, let's just go over the underlying principles. Solidarity. You need to work with people who want to make the world a better place.
See, we're going
You
back
need
to
to get off your ass and get motivated and get out there and try and make the changes that you want to see. Whether that's voting, which is Josh is gonna, it's the minimum you can do. It is the minimum you can do. Protest, raise hell, call your elected officials and harass their staff. I mean, by harass, I mean tell them shit they don't want to hear. I don't mean just call them up and go baba booey, and then hang up the phone. Actually,
I'm a huge fan of direct action.
It does seem to be the only thing that works. And do it with a camera strapped to your head if you can afford to do that.
Or strap a cell phone to your head that's live streaming. Who needs a camera?
You know,
I mean,
well, or one of those GoPros make little head-mounted things.
Those
you can
are like
put a GoPro.
$300, man.
I know. That's why I said if you can afford it. But the thing is, like, if your protest comes off, you have to worry about, is there a white nationalist with a gun who's going to dress like he's a member of the protest and then shoot up the place to try and make it look like you were responsible for the violence? Guess what? A lot of the shit that people regularly cite to me, because I have these uncomfortable conversations with people in my life and in the real world, it doesn't feel like a meaningful conversation unless it's a little bit uncomfortable. So that I regularly hear, oh, but what about in Portland and all the violence and stuff? Guess what? It was mostly white nationalists posing as the protesters.
There's a lot of stuff coming out about the FBI and its role in January 6th as well. I mean, when you think about it, the white nationalist movement is a fear-based movement.
Sure, and Christian nationalism too.
The easiest way to get, and this is the saddest part, is the easiest way to undercut both those movements is to remove the precariousness that the people who turn to these ridiculous ideologies no better than ISIS. Like, this is the thing, humans are predictable. Civilization is as only as good as its ability to like be in a society where a person can thrive. The more people suffer within a society, the more they're going to look for meaning, ways to escape it, ways to make themselves feel better. And I mean, hate is one of the easiest ways. I mean, it's not like violent militants are basically like ISIS. There are people.
It's not even just hate.
Extremism.
Hate is derived from fear.
Yeah.
Specifically, fear of the other.
Um,
of something you don't understand or something you think is going to take from you what you have or want.
right. I see, and that's the thing is that fear can be eradicated when a person has enough so that they're not worried
Needs,
about
yes,
losing.
once their needs are met.
Yeah,
So
like in
ultimately, the enemy is corporations. We talked about how five
yeah.
companies basically own the world. How far away are we from some sort of global uprising, or even an
Getting closer every
uprising
day.
as specific in the US
Very
of
close.
the fascists? Most likely. I
Mm,
don't see the left getting their shit together, to be
the left
honest.
is see, the problem with it is that America has spent decades destroying the left. I mean, to the point of promoting fascism globally. I mean, look at Nicaragua, look at fucking Afghanistan, look at Syria, look at where the Syrian ISIS, a lot like their military commanders basically came from American prisons where they were trained, from what I could understand in the long run. So, I mean, America has a long history of building fascism, and it's now it's coming. I mean, it's come home. The left has been utterly defanged on purpose.
People I consider good people literally have recently, like in discussions, several of them have basically come out as Christian nationalists.
Yeah, well, I mean,
And
that's going to be
it's
part of it.
surprising.
Well, how the stress-filled lives, I guarantee it.
Yeah,
Like,
they're all low income. They're
like,
all low income.
see, this is the precariousness, and this is the thing. The war on terror wasn't a war on terror. It was a war to create terrorists. Because when you do what Americans and their allies, including Canada, did to the Middle East, you drive people to become terrorists. And that's the thing, is like, it's such a basic concept, is that there is more than enough to go around. We can supply the needs of everyone. We just cannot afford the greed of a few. I mean, it's come down to that choice. And when it comes to researching, you're never you can never fully trust what you're reading. That is the first principle. You take everything with a grain of salt. You have to act, because if you don't act, then shit's going to get worse. But you got to take everything with a grain of salt and find people who have read a lot more than you on the subject and who are trustworthy. I
And who
mean,
have
this is the thing. We are
their
stronger
intention,
together.
again, as Josh said earlier, is to educate, not manipulate.
Yeah. I mean, this is the whole idea. We used to disagree on this. The wisdom of the crowds idea is like, my goal has always been a properly educated public since I started this. And the idea is that if you give people as much information as possible, they are more likely to come to the right decision than any individual smart person. So, I mean, group the fuck up, build communities, make your tribes huge, because there is one tribe and it's fucking 7 billion people big. And if we don't learn that, we're gonna all fucking die together at this point. And I wish I was exaggerating.
I've been big.
I've been surly.
Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. Thanks for watching,
Bye.
listening, researching.
Yeah.
Via con Dios.